Good Shabbos, my holy sisters and brothers. That was Rabbi Shlomo Katz singing Yismechu, a song to get us in the mood for Shabbos. It's almost here. It's winter time. Here in LA, we're lighting candles this week at 4:26 p.m. and next week at 4:25 p.m. And that is the earliest all year that Shabbos comes in. That's next week. And then after that, it starts to start getting slowly a little bit later each week. So it's an early Shabbos starting. These are very busy Fridays as we fight the good fight to get ready, especially coming out of Thanksgiving. For those who celebrate Thanksgiving, a big meal yesterday. And just as big a meal, an elaborate and beautiful a meal for Shabbos, and we do that every week. How are you? Let's light up the darkness. Who is going to be with us learning a little Torah as we get ready for Shabbos? It's so good. James in Indianapolis, Chaim in Charlotte, Kiran Baluch in Pakistan. Welcome, Kiran. So great to have you with us, learning a little bit of ancient, authentic, traditional wisdom and sharing it across continents, all the way across to Pakistan. Beautiful that you're in our community. Janice with us from Dallas, and Irdiancia, I hope I'm pronouncing that okay, is with us from Indonesia. Wow, we are so international today. And JD McRae is with us from Berlin. Welcome, Jada. Sharon is with us from New Jersey. Sheila from Montana. Lucy from Minnesota. Sharon says it's 4:14 candle lighting in New Jersey. The further north you go, the earlier it gets. I guess somebody who's celebrating Shabbos tonight in Halifax, Nova Scotia. It must be crazy. I don't know. Maybe it's even before 3 p.m. up there. Shmuela with us from Tacoma, Washington. Connie from New Mexico. Penina says Shabbat Shalom from New York. Over there on the YouTube side, Lindsay Adams with us saying good Erev Shabbos from Cincinnati, Ohio. Welcome, everybody. Today's class, our learning today, is dedicated by Eva Sponger in memory of Stanislav, her husband. May his memory always be I'm not sure if it's the husband. It just says in memory of Stanislav. But Eva dedicating our learning today in memory of Stanislav. May his memory always be a blessing, and may the merit of having our learning dedicated to him take him a little bit higher in the world of souls. Thank you, Eva, for sponsoring today's class. Okay. So where are we? We're in the fourth tractate of the Talmud, tractate Pesachim, the laws of Passover. We're in chapter 1, still discussing the first Mishna of chapter 1. And we're on Daf Vav, page 6. We are on page 6 of tractate Pesachim. So this first Mishna that we've been discussing for a while now, we've actually got a few more days of it, is how we start to, how we actually initiate the observance of Passover, that on the night before the night of Passover, we search our homes for leaven, for Hummus. Hummus is leavened bread, leavened products. And as we've been discussing, we search on the night before, the night of the Passover is on the 15th of the Hebrew month of Nisan. All Hebrew dates start on the night before. And so the day before that, the 14th of Nisan, it's that night, which is the night before, when we do our search by candlelight in our homes of any stray crumbs that we might have, left lying around. I don't even remember what the point of the story was, but there was a story about a rabbi who was just studying, constantly 18, 20 hours a day in his study. And so very often his meals were taken at his desk over his books, or he would snack there. And so when they were making the search for Hummus right before Passover, so he and his wife would go through the books and kind of open the books and make sure that any stray crumbs of Hummus that were actually in the books fell out of the books. But as we learned yesterday, we don't remove the chametz from our homes on the night of the 14th. We don't do that until midday on the 14th, the daytime of the 14th, because we can still eat chametz in the morning. As we learned yesterday, from the afternoon on, then we may not eat it, as prohibited, and at that point we remove it from our houses. And we saw that the correct way to remove is to burn the chametz. Why does it have to be out at that time? Because in the afternoon of the 14th, when the temple was standing, that's when we would slaughter the Pesach offering, the Paschal offering, either a lamb or a kid of the goats. And once we're slaughtering the Pesach offering, the Passover offering, the Torah said it may not be done over leavened bread. So at that point, the sages understood that the leavened bread, it was no longer permitted to us, and it had to be removed from our houses. Yesterday, we started to discuss what happens if the leaven does not belong to us, but it's in our homes for some reason. And there was the case in Mechoza, in Bavel, where Rava was the authority, and some of the people who were merchants there were storing food on behalf, not their own food, but storing the soldiers' food, right? These Persian soldiers who were just kind of using the Jewish storehouses to store some of their own supplies. And so the answer where we finally ended up in that discussion is a Jew cannot possess chametz during the festival of matzahs, during the Passover holiday. So that doesn't mean, so if somebody else's leaven, non-Jews obviously can eat bread or whatever they want during Passover, they're not prohibited to eat leavened bread the way we are. So if we're storing something, if a Jew is storing some food, some chametz for a non-Jew, then the question becomes, is the Jew financially responsible, right? If something were to happen to that food that we're storing for them, and so if it was destroyed by a fire or something, would we have to reimburse them for that food? If the answer is no, then legally we don't possess it for purposes of removing chametz from our houses, and we don't have to remove it. But if we would be financially responsible for it, then it's like we're a paid bailee, right? That's the term for it. It's like we're guarding that food. We're responsible for it. Then it's like, because we would have certain rights in that food or certain obligations to the food, then we are technically possessing it, and that would not be permitted. So Rava said, since you're holding that food in your storehouses for these soldiers, but you know that if something happened to that food and you wouldn't want those soldiers to become angry at us in the Jewish community, you would pay them for the loss. That food cannot be stored in our storehouses. You're going to have to tell them that they have to store it somewhere else. It's not permitted for us to hold on to that food during this 1 week holiday of Passover. So that's where we ended up yesterday. And now the Gemara brings a case of a related law, and we'll see why it's being brought. So this is not about Passover, but the question is, let's say that in a place like Bavel, right, which was part of the Persian Empire at that time, let's say that a Jew owns a herd of animals, right? So you have flocks. And at that time, in certain places and under certain conditions, for whatever reason, the royal tax, right? So there was a king of Persia, and he would tax the subjects, right? Now, normally taxes would be collected in the form of money, right? So, let's say that you have new animals are born into your herd during the year. That's like income, right? So if your herd expands, it's like, well, now you have greater possessions. So it's like you had income during the year. And so the king might tax your income. levy a tax on the new animals that were added to your herd. So if he took that tax in the form of money, okay, so there's no problem. You pay the tax and you're done. But if the royal authority were to take tax in the form of animals themselves, so then, legally speaking, under Jewish law, this would be as if you're co-owning your herd with the king, right? So in other words, you are now a co-owner with these animals with a non-Jew, in this case, the king of Persia. And why does that matter? Because if you co-own these animals with a non-Jew, when the firstborn, so when a female, let's say a sheep, when a female sheep, I guess that's a ewe, right, an EWE. So when a ewe has a firstborn, and the firstborn is a male, so that's a behor, right? That's the firstborn male offspring. And under Torah law, you have to actually give that up, right? The behor, the firstborn, meaning the male firstborn, belongs to God. So when the temple was standing, you would give the firstborn of any female to a priest. It would be slaughtered at the temple. Some of it would go up in smoke. Some of it, the blood would be spilled on the altar, and the remainder would be given to the priests and their families, and they would eat it, and only they could eat it. Now, if the animal developed some kind of a blemish so that it couldn't be offered on the altar, so then it would be rendered non-sacred because it couldn't be brought up on the altar, but you would still have to give it to the priest. So now that for the last 2,000 years, the temple is not standing, so how do we satisfy this? It's like the animal still has to be set aside, but it can't be sacrificed or brought up on the altar, and so we actually don't give it to priests, and so we're not going to be studying this today, but the custom has become that for the firstborn of these female animals, kosher animals, they will use the sort of the parameters of the law to blemish the animal in some way so that it would be rendered non-sacred and then it could be eaten. But it's important to understand that when the temple is standing, you can't, the animal developed a blemish. Sorry, the priest can't have it. That would be strictly prohibited. And as long as the animal didn't naturally develop that blemish, you would have to give it to the priest. However, if you co-own the animal with a non-Jew, then you would be exempt from having to give the behor, the firstborn male offspring of a female, to the priests, right? It's only a Jewish-owned animal in which the owner is obligated to give that gift to the priest. But if you co-own it with a non-Jew, then you're exempt, right? So why is this being brought now? Right? So why is this question being brought here? So you might think that if you co-own leaven, right? Like let's say you have this storehouse and you have a non-Jewish partner and you're storing a bunch of bread, in the storehouse, which is Hummus, it's leavened bread. It's not permitted to be in a Jew's possession during Passover. But if it's co-owned with the non-Jewish partner, so then maybe there's an exemption for removing the leaven from our premises in the same way that there's an exemption for giving the firstborn to the priest. And it seems like that doesn't really play out the same way because the laws of ownership and possession for the purposes of leavened products at Passover are different than the laws of ownership and possession for other purposes. And really what it boils down to is, are you responsible for that product if you have to replace it, or do you actually own it? If so, doesn't matter if there's a co-owner. You can't have it on your premises, you can't own chametz. A Jew cannot own chametz during Passover, and he certainly can't have it in his house. So then the question becomes, well, how far does this extend? Let's say that the Jewish person is a property owner, and he rents property to a non-Jew. So he's the owner of the property, but the non-Jew has rented it, right, and lives there. So it's his house in terms of he has the right of habitation, right? You've given the keys over to the non-Jew. He's renting it from you. He's not obligated to get rid of his chametz, his leavened bread during the Passover holiday. So can he keep his bread in his house that he rents from you? You're the owner. He's the renter. So would this be considered having leavened bread in our possession since it's in a house that we own, but he's renting? And the answer, if we go back to like our basic principle, if something happens to that bread, we're not responsible for it. It's in his house, right? He rents it, but he considers it his domicile, his habitation. He's just keeping his bread in the place where he lives. And if something happened to his bread, he wouldn't come to the owner of the rental property and say, replace my bread. So we're not responsible for that bread. He can keep his leavening there, even though the Jew owns the property. Useful to note at this point, however, that in ancient times, the sages told the Jews, do not rent property to non-Jews, right? You didn't have Jewish landlords and non-Jewish tenants. Why? Because in ancient times, it was much, much, much more common for people, non-Jews, to be idol worshipers. And so even though you're not responsible, for leaven that might be found in that property, with respect to the laws of idol worship, avodah zarah, that's so strict, right? That is so strict. Remember that in terms of the cardinal sins under Jewish law, murder, rape, and idol worship, right? It's right up there at that level. So if you had any reason to believe that somebody might be bringing idols into a property that you own and worshiping in there, you would absolutely not rent to that person. And then they made it more of a general decree that you can't rent to the non-Jewish tenant. Nowadays, that's clearly not in effect. All the time, we see there's Jewish landlords renting property to non-Jews. Why is that permitted? Because nowadays, we're not really so worried about people worshiping idols in the property. It's so uncommon that it's not really a concern. Okay. But hold on a second. Okay. Now a few more laws with respect to, possessing leaven products at Passover and removing them from our possession. What happens if somebody did the search for leaven on the 14th, found it all the stray pieces, then at midday on the 14th of Nisan, right before Passover begins that night, he did his job, he removed all the leaven from his house, he burnt the chametz, and then, that's it. The house is clear of chametz. He's done his job. Now he's ready for the festival of matzahs. Passover begins. He has a seder that night. We get into the week of the festival of matzahs. And then he's goes into a cupboard in the kitchen that he doesn't normally access because maybe he's just getting a pitcher for some fresh flowers. And when he opens that cupboard that he's rarely opened, he realizes he forgot to search it during the search for chametz. And there's a nice, fruitcake in there. Chametz, right? It's a leavened product that he finds in his house during Passover. He overlooked it before. Now, when he did the search for chametz, and again when he removed the chametz, he recited a formula that anything that I may have missed is null and void. I don't own it, right? So does that mean, and we're going to talk about that formula, I'm going to read it to you in a little while with respect to another law. But since he did nullify anything that he might have missed by accident, now he finds this thing. So is it like it doesn't exist? He doesn't have to worry about it since he doesn't really own it. No, he found it. It's in his house. It's chametz. He's got to do something about it. So if he finds it on the intermediate days of Passover, Chol HaMoed, meaning not the first day of the festival, which is a festival, a convocation, a sacred convocation when no work may be done, just like Shabbos. And as we learned yesterday, You can cook on a festival, but you can't kindle fire not for cooking, right? So that's why we burn the chametz before Passover begins on the 14th of Nisan, then Passover begins on the 15th. So if you find this chametz during the festival, you have to destroy it immediately. But if it's on the first day of the festival when you can't burn chametz, or on the last day, or on Shabbos and the intermediate days, so you can't burn it at that time, so then you would cover it to make sure that nobody comes to eat it or even benefit from it in any way until the first opportunity when you can destroy it, and then you destroy that chametz that should have been destroyed, gotten rid of in some way before the festival began. Another law. So we've seen that if you're not financially responsible for it and it belongs to someone else, okay, then it can be found on your property, right? And typically today we see this all the time, that we don't, we sort of symbolically destroy some of the chametz, but most people don't, go through their whole house, find anything that's a chametz product, anything that has leaven in it, any wheat product. It's not just bread. There's tons of products that are not kosher for Passover because they have some kind of potentially leavened product in them. And so you have to get rid of those products. And that includes, I'm pretty sure, things with corn syrup, right? So that's why kosher for Passover Coca-Cola, a lot of people like it because it's made with cane sugar rather than, high fructose syrup made from corn, which would be not permitted during Passover. So you have all these products that can't be in your house. What do? Typically in modern times, what we do is we sell them to a non-Jew for a nominal amount. Like he gives us $1 and buys all this food that we can't eat during Passover that might be in our kitchen. And then after Passover's over, we buy it back from him. So now it's not our chametz, it's somebody else's, a non-Jew's chametz, right? We're not responsible for it in the sense that we would have to pay him if something happened to the chametz that's in our possession. So it works. The law that's being taught right now is, so if you have this chametz that's going to be on your property because a non-Jew owns it and you're not financially responsible for it in case something happens to it, okay, where do you keep it? You're not going to keep it in your kitchen, I'll tell you that right now. You got to get it out of the kitchen because the kitchen's totally going to be koshered for Passover. All the chametz products are out of the kitchen because you don't want anything there that you might eat by accident during the holiday, which has chametz in it. So where do you put it? So the law that's mentioned here right now is if a non-Jew's leaven is stored on your property, which is okay to do because you're not financially responsible for it, still you have to surround that pile of food products with mechitzas, right? With some kind of a partition, some kind of a fence, a wall that's at least 10 handbreadths high and surrounds it. In other words, you have to isolate all that stuff in your house. Very often people will, they'll use the garage for this, right? Or like a portion of the garage, and they'll, tape it off and label it, and, like it's totally separate than the house. And it's very clear to all the Jews who are going to be living in that house during Passover or visiting that house during Passover that food we don't even own it, we don't use it, it's non-Passover food, and it's off limits, right? Off limits. So that's how you handle that, and that's the source for that law here. Okay, Rav Yehuda says, in the name of Rav, what do we do about a person who goes on a long journey before Passover, right? So he's not going to be there when the search for Passover, for chametz in the house is happening. So does he need to do that search before he leaves? And they say a long journey because maybe he's leaving weeks or even months before Passover and he's not going to be there. So does he need to do that search before he goes on his journey, even though it's weeks or months before Passover? So the answer is one who goes on a long journey and he leaves more than 30 days before Passover need not remove the chametz from his home. If he's leaving his house within 30 days of Passover, then he is supposed to remove the chametz. Now, that's how it's discussion here in the daf. There's definitely modern nuances and wrinkles to this. There's people doing home exchanges and people going to Passover programs. And like the whole idea is that they don't have to do the whole Passover cleaning. So I'm not teaching the modern law on this question. The important matter that does come up in this, first of all, Abaye is going to mention that, hold on a second. If the guy's coming back, right, he goes on a long trip, so he's not going to be there when the search would normally be done on the night of the 14th. But if he's planning to come back, like on the afternoon of the 14th, right before Passover begins, or even during Passover, let's say during the intermediate days of Passover, so he's going to be he can't then come to a house that has chametz in it. So if he's not going to be there at the time when the chametz is searched for and cleaned out because he knows he's going to be away on a journey, well, then even if he leaves 2 or 3 or 6 months before Passover, he has to clean all that chametz out if he knows that when he gets back, it's going to be Passover or just before Passover, but after the time when the search and removal of chametz would have happened. He does need to do that. But then the Gemara asks, but what about this difference that if he's leaving more than 30 days or less than 30 days before Passover? Why is 30 days significant, right? What if he was just leaving 2 days before Passover and he was going to be away the whole time, or he's leaving 2 days before Passover and he's coming back? I mean, what's special about 30 days, asks the Gemara. And the answer is, that we have a teaching, a tradition, that 30 days before the festival of Passover, we start studying the laws of Passover, right? So traditional Jews, 30 days before Passover, they start studying the laws of Passover. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says 2 weeks before Passover is when you start studying the laws of Passover. So what is between them? Why does one say 30 days and why does one say 2 weeks? So 30 days we derive from the Torah, and it was Moses who was teaching the laws 30 days. Not before Passover, but before the second Passover. Recall that when the children of Israel were in the wilderness, and it was explained to them how Passover would go, right? The first Passover was actually in Egypt, but then the second Passover was already out in the wilderness. And at that time, certain people said, we are doing, we're fulfilling obligations, responsibilities on behalf of the whole nation here in this massive encampment out in the wilderness. Let's say we're burying dead bodies, and you've told us that one who is impure, let's say by reason of contact with a corpse, cannot participate in eating the Paschal offering. Or they were away on doing a messenger job for Moses, and they weren't there at Passover. So can they still celebrate Passover? And Moses said, good question. And he checked with God, and God said, yeah, that's a good question. So you should decree that there's going to be Pesach Sheni, a second Passover, 1 month later, right? 30 days later. So that people who, not of their own will, due to circumstances beyond their control, were on the road or were in a state of tuma, in a state of ritual impurity, and couldn't participate in the first Passover, they have a redo, a makeup Passover that they can do 30 days later. And when did Moses teach those laws? 30 days before Pesach Sheni. So we see that those laws are at Numbers, the book of Numbers, in Hebrew Bamidbar. It's interesting, right? Bamidbar, the fourth book of the Bible, means in the wilderness. In English, it got translated as Numbers. I think Bamidbar is it's a nicer name for a book of the Bible, isn't it? Okay, so anyway, in the book of Numbers, chapter 9, verse 2, God said to Moses, let the children of Israel perform the Pesach, right? Bring the Passover offering at its appointed time. A subsequent verse says, and Moses told the children of Israel to perform the Pesach, and they performed the Pesach in the first month on the 14th day of the month in the evening in the desert of Sinai, right? On the afternoon of the 14th is when they slaughtered the Pesach, and then they ate it that night on the 15th. And then in the next verse it is written, and there were people who were impure due to a dead body and could not perform the Passover on that day, and they came before Moses and before Aaron on that day, at which point Moses explained the halachas, the laws of Pesach Sheni, the second Passover. So there we see that Moses was explaining the laws 30 days before the second Passover. And from that, we've learned out ever since that we study the laws of a festival 30 days. We start studying the laws of a festival 30 days before the festival, right? So we're both kind of like practically and spiritually prepared when the festival arrives 30 days later. Now, we just heard, however, that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who was a great sage and the head of the Sanhedrin, the Nasi, right, the chief rabbi in his generation, who said 2 weeks. He said we start learning 2 weeks. So where does he get his ruling? Why does he say 2 weeks when the Gemara before said 30 days? So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel goes like this. He explains that Moses was standing on the first day of Nisan, right, the first day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, and warning about the performance of the first Pesach, right, when we were still in Egypt. So on the first day of Nisan, he was speaking to the people and telling them, in 2 weeks, you're going to slaughter the Paschal offering, and then that's when we're going to leave Egypt the next day. Right? And so it says, and so how do we know that he was standing before the people 2 weeks before that? Because at Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, it is stated, Moses said to them, this month shall be for you the beginning of months, the first of the months of the year. Now it's interesting, Rosh Hashanah is the head of the year. That's the birthday of the creation of the world. But it's sort of like the Jewish people got a new lease on life, as it were, when they were redeemed from slavery in Egypt. And the very first commandment that we received as a nation, right? There were earlier, commands that God gave to the patriarchs about various things. God commanded Abraham to circumcise himself, and then the commandment of circumcision passed down from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to the 12 sons, the heads of the tribes, and throughout, Jewish history from Abraham on. But the first commandment given to the people as a nation was this, the commandment of Rosh Hodesh. To observe the first day of the month with special observances. We don't take the day off. Some communities have the tradition to give women the day off on Rosh Hodesh. They should not work on Rosh Hodesh. But at any rate, we mark and say special prayers, and we sing Hallel, as we've shown many times here at Accidental Talmudist. We recite the Hallel, the verses of praise and thanksgiving, on the first day of any Hebrew month. And the first one was, this shall be the first month to you. That was Rosh Hodesh of the month of Nisan, when we were still in Egypt, and 2 weeks later observed the Pesach. We ate the Paschal offering that night. And then the angel of death came through, the final plague, the plague of the firstborn on the Egyptians. And the next day, we marched out of Egypt, and that's what we celebrate at Passover. So that was from the first of the month to the 15th, right, which is when Passover is, 2 weeks. And that's what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's source for saying we start studying 2 weeks before Passover, the laws of Passover. The law has come to be 30 days. That was a more practical ruling, actually. Why? Because the laws of Passover are so diverse and numerous and complicated that to observe Passover properly, you need 30 days of study. Not everybody is doing Daf Yomi, reading Talmud every day, like we are here in our class. But anybody who's getting ready to celebrate Passover, any Jew who's getting ready to celebrate Passover, traditionally, you should start studying the laws of Passover 30 days before. Likewise, that has come to be the custom that we start studying the laws of all festivals, including Shavuos and Sukkot, even Hanukkah and Purim, 30 days before. It's a custom, not an obligation, but it's a pretty universal custom. And it's also on the basis of this that we celebrate Shabbos Haggadah. So that's Shabbos Haggadah means the great Shabbos, but what it refers to is the Shabbos before Passover, right? So on the Shabbos before Passover begins, it became a custom in Jewish communities that the rabbi of the community would deliver a lecture about Passover, right on the Shabbat when everybody was in synagogue, that is closest to and before Passover. So that became the Shabbos Haggadah sermon. And that, my friends, is the origin of sermons. That's where it comes from. Because actually the rabbi was the teacher of the community. Rabbi means teacher. But remember, people were learning all the time. They were bringing questions to the rabbi. They were learning every day in the Beis Midrash. Giving a sermon on Shabbat, that actually was not common. That's a much more modern thing. Many synagogues now, the rabbi speaks every Shabbos. That was not the way it usually was. It started with the rabbi giving the lecture on the Shabbos before Passover. Then there would be the other big Shabbos, before high holidays, where they would have a similar type of lecture. And it was really like 2 big sermons a year that the rabbi would give. But over time, it morphed, especially in modern times when people spent less and less time with their rabbis and in synagogue during the week, that it became more of the weekly sermon when they would at least be with the rabbi and learning on Shabbos. So that's where that comes from. Okay. And we covered that, and we covered that. I'm almost at the end. So if you have questions or comments, please put them in the questions and comments, and I will come to answer. We talk about that. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to mention today is here it says on this page that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav that one who searches for leaven must render all his leaven null and void, both cognitively, like in his mind and in his heart, and verbally, right? So he's going to say a certain recital of how he nullifies anything that he might have missed. And what is the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? And it's because, first of all, he might have missed something, but also because he might have missed something that later he's like, oh, I didn't want to throw that away, and he finds not just like, kind of an old, fruitcake that he didn't care about, but some kind of a delicacy, right, which should have been, maybe sold to the non-Jew or put somewhere else, or it should have just been destroyed, and he didn't, and he might, kind of hesitate before destroying it when he finds it later on Passover. So this kind of recital helps, but it's especially for what we might have missed. So here, let me read that. I read it the other night, but let me mention, because what happens is there are 2 recitals. Right? So on the night of the 14th, when we search by candlelight, and we search in the hidden places, even in cracks on the floor, and one is not to speak between, and we say a blessing before we do it, because we're commanded to search for leaven in our homes. So first we say a blessing. We say, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the removal of Hummus. That's the blessing. Then we don't talk. Now we do the search in the house by candlelight. We find, usually we even stash a few pieces that are well wrapped, like in tinfoil or something, so that the kids can find it. We're still going to be able to eat chametz the next day, so we haven't removed it from the house. It's just we go through that search. But now we know where all the chametz is. We've searched it out, and there's the stuff we might eat the next day, and the stuff we're going to get rid of when we burn it, but we're not burning it yet. So, but after the search is concluded, then we recite all leaven or anything leavened, which is in my possession, which I have neither seen nor removed, and about which I am unaware, shall be considered naught and ownerless as the dust of the earth. In other words, you've given it away. It's ownerless. You no longer own it, so at least it's not in your possession. You do that after the search. Then the next day, right on the morning of the 14th of Nisan, right about midday, the chametz, including the 10 pieces that you stashed around the house and brought out, should be burned in a special fire. And then after you burn the chametz on that day, during the daytime before Passover begins that night, then you recite all leaven, or anything leavened, which is in my possession, whether I have seen it or not, whether I have observed it or not, whether I have removed it or not, shall be considered naught and ownerless as the dust of the earth. So this is the special recital where you nullify it, like it's you no longer own it. So, if you made a mistake, God forbid, there's still some chametz around you missed, it's not yours, right? It doesn't belong to anybody. It's ownerless as the dust of the earth. Now, while you're burning the chametz, and with this I'll finish and go to comments and questions, it's a very beautiful, very spiritual thing that we say. So during the burning of the chametz, we say, "May it be your will, Lord our God and God of our fathers, that just as I remove the chametz from my house and from my possession, so shall you remove all the extraneous forces, purge the spirit of impurity from the earth, eradicate our evil inclination from within us, and grant us a heart of flesh to serve you in truth." And all the sitra achra. The sitra achra is the other side, meaning the forces of evil. And all the klipot are the husks of earthliness and, of kind of like of the desires of flesh. When we say about a heart of flesh, by the way, that's as contrasted to a heart of stone, right? That's a prayer we have elsewhere. God, remove from me my heart of stone and grant me a heart of flesh that I can serve you in truth. When we're talking about the klipot, it's like we want to take away the evil desires of the flesh which surround the sparks of holiness which are in this world. So we're always trying to remove from ourselves, our evil inclination, the desires of the other side, the sitra achra, and the klipot, these husks of unholiness that surround the sparks of holiness. And so we say, and please remove, and all the sitra achra, and all the klipot, and all the wickedness, destroy and smoke. We're standing over the chametz, which is burning. That's when we're saying this. And destroy and smoke, and abolish the rule of evil from the earth, and all those whose distress the Shekhinah remove with a spirit of destruction and of judgment, just as you annihilated Egypt and its idols in those days, at this time. Amen. Selah. So, the Messiah is not mentioned here, right? It doesn't mention Mashiach. But there is a tradition that Mashiach will come quite possibly around Passover, and certainly in the Messianic age, says the prophet, that before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord, when the Messiah will, come, the Messianic age will begin. First, the prophet Elijah will come and turn the hearts of the sons to their fathers and the hearts of the fathers to their sons, etc. And of course, Elijah, we open the door for Elijah during the Passover Seder because maybe he has come to announce that the Messiah has arrived and it's time. The third temple is going up right now. And so, even though the Messiah is not mentioned in this passage, we have this idea that as we burn the chametz, so may all evil and evil desire and evil inclination and injustice be removed from the world, right? And so there we see that the chametz represents, and it's like, the Torah just says remove the chametz, right? You can't have leavened bread in your possession. But here we're getting at that kind of spiritual inner meaning of the chametz, that somehow it's associated with evil forces in the world. Why? Because it's puffed up. That it doesn't spell that out, but it's a pretty traditional teaching that puffed up bread represents our puffed up egos. In other words, arrogance, right? And, in the culture, sometimes they say that money is the root of all evil. But this would more suggest that arrogance is the root of all evil. Why? Because arrogance, why is arrogance such a particularly evil trait? Because one who is arrogant thinks that only he matters, right? And not just to the exclusion of other people, but even to the exclusion of the Holy One, blessed be He, right? One who is arrogant does not submit to God, right? One who is arrogant lives in a godless world and just does whatever he wants and feeds his own desires and his own inclinations. And that's the opposite of what it means to live a life of faith, a love of submission to the will of God, a life of taking care of God's creatures, etc., etc. So when the Messianic age comes, it'll be very natural to not feel the pull of arrogance and of all the evil inclinations. However, until then, this is teaching us that all of us have Hummus in our lives, and all of us are waging a constant battle against sort of arrogance and faithlessness, etc. But at Passover, we go through a kind of physical, symbolic representation of removing the Hummus from our lives. And that kind of helps us kind of enter a state, hopefully, as we head to the Seder that night, of kind of heightened purity in ourselves. And that's what this procedure and this, these rituals are all about. Okay, so let me get to comments and questions. Lucy, is there a connection between the custom of spring cleaning and the getting rid of Hummus in preparation for Passover? I mean, I don't know, if like generally spring cleaning in the culture, maybe it was just that people were stuffed up, especially in cold weather places. And, once it finally got warm and they could air out their habitations, and, maybe it has nothing to do with the Jewish people. But certainly for the Jewish people, there is a sense that comes springtime and the renewal coming out of winter, and we're heading back into, the trees are budding again, and there's a renewal of life in the world. And just during that time, we are going to do a massive spring cleaning of our homes. And so as we head into that Seder, we've been learning those laws for 30 days. We've been really thinking about Passover for a month, even before Passover comes. We've cleaned out our houses. And we're thinking, that God, we need you, right? Like we're wallowing in a world of husks of unholiness, surrounding sparks of holiness, kind of caging the sparks of holiness in this world. And we're going to, the whole idea of Passover is that when we were slaves, we cried out to God and He remembered us, right? But we have to cry out. And so this idea, sometimes we just get so caught up in the mundane issues of our life that we forgot to, cry out to God. And so, a lot of people are just kind of, that's where they develop that heart of stone. They just think, well, life is good. I work in a big building. I go to work in a black car. I got it going on. What do I need, religion for? So at least if they're observing Passover, they're going to be reminded, what it means to be a person of faith, and a Jew is to cry out to God and to ask Him for help. And if you don't think you need help, you need a lot of help, because everybody needs help. And we're all constantly waging these kind of inner spiritual battles. Sharon, when we sell our Hummus and others' Hummus and somebody else's Hummus is in our house, is theirs sold as well, or do we need a separate contract? Great question. I'm not sure. I'm just not sure. I feel like we had something about that in this daf, but it's not. I'm not sure. It's a great question. Because now, if one thing we've seen is if you're financially responsible for it, for sure you have to, do that. But if you're storing, you're a Jew and you're storing some of your Hummus for some reason in somebody else's house who's a Jew, that's why, by the way, when we sell the chametz, we don't actually make an inventory of every item in our possession. We say like everything that might fall to me to that is in my possession at all, that I'm selling it. And hopefully every Jew goes through that process in the springtime. So you might ask, what if one of the Jews, the one who owns, is not so observant, and the one who's possessing it is? Can the one who's going to make that deal with the rabbi, can he say, well, I'm selling everything that's in my possession, I'm storing something for another Jew, I hope that I can take care of his obligation for him because he might not do it? But I don't know. That's a good question for a rabbi. I'm not sure what the answer to that is. It's a great question. Lynn, home altars for worship of statues used in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Roman Catholicism are still common. Jewish landlords no longer guard against such tenant rentals as they used to. Yeah, as far as I know. First of all, I'm not commenting on other religions. I just don't know that much about other religions. But second, I think the idea is that in the world, at least in the Jewish world, there are Jews in India, but not so many. But in most places where Jews live in the world, if they own property and they're renting it to a non-Jew, it's just pretty unlikely that they're going to come in and, worship idols, right? And that just seems, that's how the law is laid out here in the Koran, that it says these days there's a leniency on this because it's so, rare that people are worshiping idols. It doesn't seem to be something that we're concerned about, since in the majority of cases it would not be relevant. If the question that you might be asking is, well, you own property and you learn that the people who are living there actually are worshiping idols, what do you need to do about it? That's a good question, and I think that would be a question for your rabbi. And finally, Daniel says, thank you for doing this. I grew up in a home that was not Torah observant, and whenever I go to a synagogue, I feel so frustrated. There's so much culture and tradition that I know nothing about. I just don't feel like I belong there, and I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you, Daniel. I mean, what you just said is, one of the big reasons why we do this, because we identify with you. We get it. We were there. I had a bar mitzvah, but not any kind of real traditional Jewish education. And Nina likes to say that the only Jewish thing they did in her house is not have a Christmas tree. Like she just didn't have that. And that feeling of, especially if you were to go to an Orthodox service where everyone just knows everything, when you get called up for an aliyah to say a blessing when they read the Torah in an Orthodox synagogue, you say the blessing and then the Torah reader reads the Torah in your name, but you say the blessing. And, in a lot of Orthodox shuls, like, they don't even have the blessing printed out. It's just assumed that everyone knows it by memory. So, I'm in the Orthodox community now. I'm mindful of this kind of thing. And if I see somebody come into the space where we worship who maybe, is feeling a little unfamiliar, I'm going to go out of my way to make sure that he's comfortable and that he has what he needs. And that is an obligation that really is incumbent on all of us who are fortunate enough to be connected. Those of us who are Baalei Teshuvah, who were not so connected to Judaism and then later in life reconnected, we're especially sensitive of that. But we give big props to organizations like Chabad, like Aish, and all the Kiruv organizations who are saying, there's a big tragedy out there that just so many Jews who might even like to connect with Jewish practice, they didn't have that education when they're young, and no one is reaching out to them now. So certainly at Accidental Talmudist, our motto is wisdom for all. So we share Jewish wisdom with all people. We try to follow, Isaiah's thing, be a light unto the nations, and we share with all people. But it's especially close to our hearts when Jews who are like we were, and who just are lacking some information, basic information, education, can come and learn with us and start to grow in wisdom and comfort with the observances, take on the mitzvahs, the commandments, and over time, it gets easier. It gets easier over time. I'm almost reminded that in college, I remember I took a psychology class, and I don't remember who the famous psychologist was. It might have been Erik Erikson, but I'm not sure who it was. But somebody said that there's a theory of sort of how people grow into their professions, right? So young adults who become doctors or accountants or computer programmers or entrepreneurs, when they first start to do their profession, it's like they feel like they're faking it. They feel like, these people are going to look at me and call me doctor. I mean, okay, I went to medical school. I worked really hard, but, I'm not like that 50-year-old guy who really knows everything. What if I make a mistake? I almost feel like a fraud, And then over time, of course, the patients keep coming. The doctor keeps dispensing medicine and advice and, treats his patients. And over time, he stops feeling like an actor and starts to be a doctor, right? And likewise, when we grow in our observance, our faith observance, sometimes in the beginning we feel like a little like, oh man, they must look at me like I don't know anything. I'm so ignorant. I feel kind of like a phony being here because I don't know enough. But you stay with it. You just kind of and keep asking questions. Because what's interesting is even in these places where everybody's, FFB, right, from birth, right? People who've been religious all their lives and they just kind of know everything. They know all the laws. They've just grown up with it. And we feel like if we ask them questions, they'll just look at us like idiots. But actually, when you ask people a question, they're always, I mean, in my experience, they're always happy to tell you. Some people are better at explaining than others, but everyone is happy to be asked about Jewish practice, Jewish observance, Jewish wisdom, Jewish laws. They may not even know the answer. What's amazing is how often it happens that you look at somebody who's like, they got the long beard, they've been religious all their lives, they surely know, and you ask a question that comes out of your studies, they're like, oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Let's ask the rabbi together because I don't know. So the point is, there's no silly questions. Every question is a good question. And don't let the fact that you don't know or feel like almost a little bit hypocritical because I'm doing this and not that because I don't know about how to do that yet. I'm just trying to do this first. Like in the beginning when I first reconnected, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago, I started wearing tzitzis, the ritual fringes, because you were commanded to wear that. And we say that commandment whenever we recite the Shema. And I was like, okay, well, it says in the Torah I should wear fringes. I'm going to put on the fringes. And I wear them to remind me to do other commandments. So I was wearing my fringes, and early on I was wearing them out. So people would look at me and they're like, oh, that's an Orthodox Jew. But I was really at the beginning of my practice. I wasn't even attending an Orthodox synagogue yet. And so if they observed other things that I was doing that, weren't so good to do for a Jew, and I'm wearing the tzitzis, it was like a total contradiction. And I didn't even realize I was, doing that, like sort of flying the flag and not representing properly. But over time, you work those things out, and you figure out what's okay and what's not, and when to do this and when to do that. And don't be shy. Just ask questions and keep trying. And then there's a beautiful teaching. Nina's reminding me that the Orthodox people say, right? The ultra-Orthodox is a very beautiful teaching that a Baal Teshuvah, so one who has returned, right? One who was like out or never learned how to be an observant Jew and found his or her way back. About this person, it says that a Baal Teshuvah stands where one who's been religious from birth cannot. What does that mean? So this person who during all those years that he wasn't keeping mitzvahs and wasn't keeping Shabbos and was eating all kinds of unkosher food and, was basically doing all kinds of biblical sins, now that they've returned, somehow they're standing in a place, meaning in a place of holiness closer to God, where the one who's been religious all his life cannot stand? How is that possible? The one who's been religious all his life hasn't done all these sins, hasn't done all those transgressions, has been observant all their lives. Why would they be punished for that, not being able to stand in a place of holiness that the returnee can stand? And the reason is because the returnee, it was really unlikely that he was going to return or that she was going to return. People who go out, rarely come back, or people who are born, they're Jewish, but they don't even know they're Jewish, have never done anything Jewish. It's so unlikely that such a person is going to get motivated to learn and to study and to find their way back and to become Shomer Shabbos and keeping Shabbos and eating kosher, etc., that when they do, it's a huge merit to them. And not only that, but all of their transgressions from the time that they were not observant Jews gets transformed into merits. The actual transgressions become merits, right? Which is an amazing, amazing teaching and a very well-established and traditional teaching. So, which is to say, anybody who's listening to me now and, you're just starting your Jewish journey, you're a Jew, you don't really know how to be a Jew or what it means to be a Jew. So first of all, the fact that you're interested is huge. You get big points in heaven for that. And you will get assistance, kind of energy and opportunity. And the more you want to learn, the more opportunities will present themselves to learn with great teachers. Books will come your way, teachings will come your way, etc. And finally, Shira Diaz-Boot says, I don't think one Jew can store for another Jew. Right? Well, you can't store for another Jew during... This is a complicated question, right? Whether you can nullify for another Jew if it's in your garage, like where you've curtained it off and sold it to the non-Jew. I'm just not sure if some of that food belongs to some other Jew, how that works out. We haven't come across that teaching yet, and I'm not sure what the answer is. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. You should have a really sweet Shabbos. I am wearing this lighted up t-shirt. Hanukkah's coming soon. These are available in our store. They support our nonprofit. That's at shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. This is a very big seller. So are the Grateful Yid shirts and the Wisdom pillows. There's tons of good stuff, really good gifts. Good for Jews and non-Jews. There's really fun stuff in our store, shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. We are reaching the world with Torah here, partnering with us by making a donation, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. We're entering our fundraising season. You're going to be hearing more about that. But we got to raise money that we need to create this content all year long to reach new people. There's production costs, administrative costs, staff, paperwork, stationery. There's a lot of marketing that we boost a lot of our posts online in Facebook advertising is very efficient for reaching people that might be interested in this wisdom, but it definitely costs money. And for all these reasons, donating to our nonprofit organization, becoming our partner in lighting up the darkness and sharing Jewish wisdom with the world, it's a very, very important work. And when you become our partner, and the impact of your donation is vast, that so many people receive these teachings around the world, and that accords to your merit if you donate both in this world and in the next world. So please do that at donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. Have a great Shabbos, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow evening after Shabbos ends. It's usually about 2 hours after Shabbos ends here in LA. So probably, about 7:30 Pacific. We'll be back together again tomorrow night to continue with Pesachim Daf Zion, page 7. All the best.